Good morning. It is Wednesday, April the 27th, and this is The Drill. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So after the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have no free lunch, fragility, and Yankee Stadium. All that and more after I get back. Good morning. Thank you. And now the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for April the 27th. I will be your refuge from the oppressor. My child, never forget that I am a refuge for you from those who would attempt to oppress you, either from without or from an evil spirit within. I will be your refuge in times of trouble. I will never forsake you when you seek me, and will administer judgment for you because of your uprightness. I am the Lord your God and will be with you. I am mighty to save. I take great delight in you, and I will quiet you with my love. I will rejoice over you with singing. I will remove sorrow from you and will deal with all who oppressed you. I will give you honor and praise among all the people of the earth, and will restore your fortunes before your very eyes. Psalm 9, verses 8 through 10, Zephaniah chapter 3, verses 17 through 20. Prayer declaration. Father, you have promised to defend the cause of the weak and fatherless, and to maintain the rights of the poor and oppressed. You will rescue the weak and needy, and will deliver me from the hand of the wicked that seek to oppress me. You uphold the cause of the oppressed, and you have set me free from oppression. Amen. And that was the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for April the 27th. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. Peace prevailed, quote, peace prevailed in large part because non-intervention became the hallmark of foreign policy. There was unprecedented freedom of movement for people, goods, and capital. Trade expanded, strengthening the stake that nations had in the continued prosperity of one another as customers and suppliers. While free trade was never a guarantee of peace, it reduced the danger of war more than any public policy ever had, unquote. Jim Powell. The last part of this entirely brilliant sentiment and the nuance therein is so important. Countries that trade with each other may very well not like each other, but the risk of war violence is exponentially reduced. History and common sense tells us this. There is no guarantee does not give us the right to ignore the substantial wisdom and risk mitigation such beneficial cooperation affords. All the treaties and policies in human history have not reduced nation-on-nation violence as much as free trade has. And that was, there's no free lunch. Thank you. Now from the book, The Collapse of Parenting, Chapter 5, Why are so many of our children so fragile? Fragility has become a characteristic of American children and teenagers to an extent unknown 25 years ago. That's what I'm seeing in the office today and what I did not see in the office years ago. But besides my observations and experience as a physician over the past quarter century, several lines of evidence support my claim that young Americans are more fragile in comparison with young Americans from 2 or 3 decades ago. The first and most obvious evidence is the extraordinary rise in the proportion of young Americans diagnosed and treated today for anxiety and depression. In Chapter 3, we saw that young people in this country are now much more likely to be diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder compared to young people in other countries today and compared to young people in this country 30 years ago. That line of evidence is relevant in Julia's case, since 2 board-certified physicians, a pediatrician and a psychiatrist, treated her with medication for depression. But that line of evidence doesn't pertain in Aaron's case. Nobody has diagnosed Aaron with anything. In fact, Aaron is a pretty happy guy as long as you don't interrupt him while he's playing his video game. But Aaron and Julia do share something in common. In each case, something inside seems to be missing. Some inner strength that we took for granted in young people a few decades back, but that just didn't develop in these two. In my assessment, one cause of the fragility in both Aaron's case as well as Julia's case is a weak parent-child relationship. Aaron and Julia would be the first to tell you that they love their parents, but they're not seriously concerned with what their parents think. Or more precisely, Aaron is more concerned about what his peers think than what his parents think. Julia is more concerned about her inflated self-concept than what her parents think. Kids need to value their parents' opinion as their first scale of value, at least throughout childhood and adolescence. Of course, this rule cannot apply if the parents are incompetent or pathological or absent altogether. My assumption in this book is that if you are a caring and concerned parent. If that assumption isn't valid, then this book is not for you. If parents don't come first, then children become fragile. Here's why. A good parent-child relationship is robust and unconditional. My daughter might shout at me, "I hate you," but she would know that her outburst is not going to change our relationship. My wife and I might choose to suspend some of her privileges for a week if she were to have such an outburst, but she would know that we would both still love her. That won't change, and she knows it. Peer relations, by contrast, are fragile by nature. Emily and Melissa may be best friends, but both of them know that one wrong word might fracture the relationship beyond repair. That's one reason why Emily is so frantic about checking her text messages every 5 minutes. If Melissa sends a text and Emily does not promptly respond, Emily's afraid that Melissa may misinterpret her silence as indicating a lack of enthusiasm. In peer relations, everything is conditional and contingent. Aaron doesn't want to look incompetent in the eyes of his peers, not for a week, not even for a single day. So he will not risk the humbling experience of being the least fit player. Julia can't bear the thought of being anything other than a top student. So she will not risk the humbling experience of being below class average in physics. Her self-concept is conditional on being number one. When she is no longer number one or close to number one, her self-concept crumbles. I agree with the 2 other physicians who evaluated her that she meets formal criteria for the diagnosis of depression, but those other doctors failed to ask why she is depressed. The answer is that the reality has popped the bubble of her self-concept, and the appropriate remedy for Julia, I believe, is not Risperdal, but rather the construction of a different self-concept. one rooted not in extraordinary academic achievement, but the unconditional love and acceptance that her parents are ready to offer her. Children and teenagers need unconditional love and acceptance today, no less than they did 30 or 50 years ago. But they cannot get unconditional love and acceptance from their peers or from a report card. That's one reason why there has been an explosion in the prevalence of anxiety and depression among American teenagers as they frantically try to secure their attachment to other teens, as they try to gain unconditional love and acceptance from sources that are unable to provide it. Many American parents accept this situation as an inevitable consequence of 21st century life, but they are mistaken. This phenomenon of kids valuing their relationships with same-age peers or their sports or their academics or their after-school activities above their relationships with parents is far more prevalent in North America than elsewhere. Most kids in Ecuador, Argentina, and Scotland still look forward to spending free time with parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles, just as American kids might have 2 generations ago. American novelist Reef Larson recently moved with his family to Scotland. In contemporary Scottish society, Larson observes, family always comes first. By comparison, he's struck by the failure of contemporary American culture to acknowledge that children actually exist. All of us, as parents, need to establish the primacy of the parent-child relationship over peer-to-peer relationships, over academics, and over other activities. How to accomplish that? One simple strategy is to schedule vacations just for the family. When your daughter asks whether she can bring her best friend along, the answer must be no. If the best friend comes along, then a significant portion of time on the vacation will go to your daughter bonding with her best friend. The main purpose of the family vacation should be to strengthen the bonds between parent and child, not give the kids an expensive play date. Even simpler is to create rituals, such as a weekly parent-child visit to a local coffee shop. Taking a walk together to the coffee shop, if it is within walking distance, provides a good opportunity to talk and listen to whatever your daughter or son might have to say. The family supper, the family trip to the movies, or even a ride in the car all provide opportunities to strengthen these bonds. In all your arrangements for your child, try to make connecting with adults a higher priority than connecting with your child's same-age peers or academics or after-school activities. Prioritize your extended family and your close adult friends in the life of your child. If you have the opportunity to move closer to your child's aunts, uncles, and grandparents, do it. We did. When you're planning a vacation, look for opportunities for your child to connect with your aunts, uncles, and grandparents. You want to give your child a different perspective. You want to connect her to your culture. That task is arguably more different today than at any other time in American history. Today, the default for most American kids is a primary attachment to same-age peers. There's another important element in Aaron's story, and that is his involvement in social media linked to online video games. I can recall boys who were in situations similar to Aaron's as recently as 15 or 20 years ago. They failed to make the team, so they worked harder, got in shape, went back the next week or the next season, and then made the team. Those stories were common 20 years ago. They are rare today. How come? I think the online world is part of the answer. 20 years ago, the internet was a slow, chunky novelty. There was no such thing as an online video game. It took forever just to download a single photo. Playing a fast-moving game against an online opponent in real time wasn't possible on a 14K dial-up connection. But today's online world provides Aaron with an alternative culture created mostly by other young people. His parents regard Aaron's immersion in the world of video games as unusual. They wonder why Aaron is not more concerned about being out of shape physically. But Aaron's reference point is not the real world of his parents, but the online world of his video games and the associated social media sites. He is in touch with literally hundreds of other people who are roughly his own age and whose priorities are similar to his. Video games come first. In his online world, his unconcerned, laid-back style is the norm, not the exception. If he were to express an earnest desire to get in shape so that he could play sports rather than spend his time with a game controller and a video screen, he would likely get a derisive response from his online peers, or they might think that he was joking. Let's see. Aaron's father isn't sure what to do. He said to me, who am I to tell him that he shouldn't go after his dream? I just want him to be happy. And that's a common response. The kids themselves often say something along the same lines. Another young person in a similar situation said to me, I'm just trying to do my own thing. Whatever floats your boat, you know. That notion, whatever floats your boat, if it feels good, do it, reflects a particularly American perspective. That lack of concern is one factor contributing to the rapid rise in the proportion of young Americans who are not working and not looking for work. And that rapid rise, as we have seen, is uniquely American. It's not occurred in Sweden, Canada, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Australia, Poland, and so forth. Part of your job as a parent is to educate desire, to teach your child to go beyond whatever floats your boat, to enjoy and to want to enjoy pleasures higher and deeper than video games and social media can provide. Those pleasures may be found perhaps in conversation with wise adults, or in meditation, prayer, or reflection, or in music, dance, or the arts. The parent-child attachment has to be the first priority. The irony here is that the majority of middle-income and affluent American parents already know about attachment. Some of them have even read books about attachment parenting. They know all about offering their newborn baby unconditional love and acceptance. By 6 months of age, a baby born to middle-income or affluent American parents is likely to be surrounded with nurturing and love. At 1 year, American toddlers are just as competent as toddlers in the Netherlands or New Zealand. But after their child's second birthday, American parents begin to go astray. Your parenting style has to change as your child grows up. Think of a high school cheerleader. Now think of Jurgen Klinsmann, coach of the American men's national soccer team, which advanced to the round of 16 in the 2014 Men's World Cup. Or Jill Ellis, coach of the American women's soccer team, champions of the 2015 Women's World Cup. When your child is an infant or toddler, you play the role of cheerleader. When your toddler stumbles and falls, then clambers back up again, you say, good job, way to go. But as your child gets older, your role must shift. Less cheerleader, more Jurgen Klinsmann and Jill Ellis. You have to correct, to redirect, to point out shortcomings. If your teenage son can't think of anything to do for fun other than playing video games, then you need to turn off the devices and get him into the real world. You need to educate his desire. You have to teach your child your values rather than allowing him or her to adopt by default the values promoted by contemporary American culture. The main mechanisms by which contemporary American culture today asserts its primacy in the hearts of American kids are the internet and the mobile phone. Neither of these existed in the lives of American kids 25 years ago, but today it's common to see an American 4-year-old playing with an iPad complete with internet access. That's particularly true in affluent communities, and it's becoming common to see American 9-year-olds with their own cell phone. Again, especially in affluent communities. Now you start to see the real harm of the 9-year-old with the mobile phone, talking to her friends or texting them. The more time she spends connecting with her friends, the more likely she is to look to them for guidance about what matters and what doesn't. The technology and devices further divide the generations and undermine parental authority. Kids are more likely to understand the technology than adults are. The 9-year-old easily conquers the vagaries of Instagram and Snapchat. Her 40-something parents may not even know what Snapchat is. Even if they do, they may not see the point. Your daughter and her friends are more likely than you are to know how to upload a photo from a cell phone to an Instagram page complete with digital special effects. That's one reason why your daughter may come to value her friends' opinions over yours. Her friends seem to know more about important things than you do. And the more time she spends on Instagram, the more likely she is to think that knowing about Instagram is important. Some countries have traditions that help to maintain parent-child bonds. In Holland, schools close at noon every Wednesday so that kids can enjoy some quality midweek time with their parents. French kids in elementary school traditionally have Wednesdays off as well. Let's see here. Many Swiss employers accommodate that tradition of giving, In Geneva, Switzerland, the public elementary schools close for 2 hours at lunch every day so kids can go home and eat lunch with their parents. We used to do something similar in this country. Growing up outside Cleveland, Ohio in the 1960s and 70s, I walked home for lunch every day. For me, it seemed pointless because my mom had to work and I was walking to an empty home. My parents were divorced. My father lived in Los Angeles. My mother's employer didn't give her a 2-hour lunch break so that she could be at home with her kids. So what are we supposed to do? American employers aren't going to give us, the employees, 2 hours off for lunch. They're not going to give us off every Wednesday afternoon. So we have to fight for supper with our kids, fight for time with your children, cancel or forgo the after-school activities if need be in order to have more evening meals together. Your kids can't attach to you if they hardly ever see you. And turn the devices off. Parents have to regain the central place in the lives of their children, displacing same-age peers. Same-age friends are great for your child, but your child's first allegiance must be to you, not to her best friend. The contemporary culture of texting, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and online video games has concealed this fundamental reality, promoting and accelerating the premature transfer of allegiance to same-age peers. Why are so many Americans' kids so fragile? Fundamental reason is the breaking of the bonds across generation, so that kids now value the opinions of same-age peers or their own self-constructed self-concept more than they care about the good regard of their parents and other adults. The result is a cult of success, because success is the easiest way to impress your peers and yourself. But the cult of success just sets the kid up for catastrophe when failure arrives, as we saw in Julia's case. And failure will come sooner or later. Failure comes to us all. The willingness to fail and then move on with no loss of enthusiasm is a mark of character. The opposite of fragility, as we have discussed, fragility in this chapter, is the willingness to fail. When kids are secure in the unconditional acceptance of their parents, they can find the courage to venture and to fail. When kids value the good regard of their peers or their own self-concept above the good regard of their parents, they lose the willingness to fail. They become fragile. And so that was chapter 5 of the book, The Collapse of Parenting. And next time we're going to go into part 2, which is solutions, in which the author, Dr. Sachs, offers solutions. So back in a minute. Thank you. Before I go into the next segment with the Tales from My Bicentennial Life, I wanted to comment as to why I'm reading this book. Number one, people are always asking talk show hosts, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Good question, because the talk show host spends so much time demoralizing their audiences, talking about negative things. Dan Bongino does it. It's the Rush Limbaugh effect. Rush Limbaugh's show, at least in the third trimester of his show, it was nothing but negatives. He was, this is no good, that's no good, so-and-so said this bad thing about conservatives, etc. And people call and say, what do I do? And he says, well, elections have consequences. Are you kidding? That's it. So I think I can do better than that. And that's what this book is about. You want to know what you can do? Probably the best thing you can do for yourself and for the United States of America is raise your children. Now, he's talking about in his book about fragility and that you need more parental contact, but simply sitting down with your kids at the dinner table and chit-chatting with them about their day or whatever is insufficient. He's missing the point. You have to be of value to your children. And the one way you can do it that their peers cannot is with experience. You see, their peers have the same exact experience they do. You have superior experience. You've been where they are. You know, maybe through hard knocks, maybe through advice you got from your parents, what to do and what not to do. Okay, so you want to go out and sit down with them and have quality time, which means you're asking probing questions. Are you having any problems with kids at school? Teasing and bullying. And you tell them how to deal with it. If not in terms of how to respond to the bully, then at least how to deal with it psychologically. Okay. And then you ask them, is there anybody you're interested in? When they're old enough to start getting romantic ideas, did you make any new friends? Is there anybody that you want to be friends with? Oh, I met this girl, blah, 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 blah. Now you can go in and say, you know what? When I was your age, I was interested in this girl too. And her name was Dee Dee, and I used to walk her to school and diddly-daddly-do. Now what you're doing is you're establishing a real bond. Dinner doesn't provide a bond. Food doesn't provide a bond, an automatic bond. Okay, sitting together at the table with no phones and stuff doesn't provide an automatic bond. You have to make the effort. Okay, and the effort and the way to connect is with your experience. When your children start to know that they can get information from you they can't get anywhere else, you become a valuable resource. And that's how to destroy the culture of disrespect. Okay, now on to Yankee Stadium. Thank you. And now the, what is it called? The book, Tales from My Bicentennial Year by Mike Buell. And it's about a family in Gansevoort, New York, in the Adirondacks, and their various adventures from 1975 to 1976, told from the perspective of the young son named Mike. So this is chapter 24. Chapter 23 was when we had the Battle of the Forts, in which Mike C. ended up breaking his arm, and the dads went and destroyed the forts. And so now, chapter 24, Yankee Stadium. But I'm only going to read, because it's a very, very long chapter, so I'm going to read half of it this time and half next time. As summer approached, the warmer weather continued. In May, we were hitting the 70-degree mark. It was great. We were playing baseball every day after school and taking advantage of the ballpark in my backyard on the weekends. We started playing right after breakfast until the sun came down. We were all rooting for the Red Sox, hoping that they could get back to World Series after blowing it against the Reds last year. Which is, I still believe to this day, that was the greatest World Series ever. When you think back, it seems to me anyways, it always is the Red Sox in the most exciting games in history. Look at the 76 series, then against the Mets in 88, then coming back from 3 games down against the Yankees in the division series, then finally winning it. Anyhow, back to spring of 1976. We were playing grounders off this particular Thursday after school because the Third Streeters weren't around and we didn't have enough guys to play a game. Grounders is where no matter how many guys you have, you split up. So it could be 1-on-1, 2-on-2, etc. Your team stands in a line facing the other team, maybe 20 feet apart or so. Take the ball and whip it into the ground as hard as you can, sending a scorcher ground ball towards the other guy. If he catches it and fields it, no points for you. If it gets past him, you score a point. This can go on for hours, as there's no set point limit or anything. You can get some great dives for the ball going. My dad, in his business suit with his briefcase still in hand, came walking around to the backyard from the driveway. This was highly unusual. He normally went right into the house and wanted dinner. I thought we were in trouble again. What the heck did we do? He didn't have on his death stare, though, so maybe we were okay. "How you boys doing?" he asked. "Good, we guess," we answered back. "Who do the Sox have this weekend?" he quizzed us. "Yankees," we all answered. We knew that. "How would you all like to go see the Red Sox at Yankee Stadium this Saturday?" He smiled as he asked us. You can guess our stunned and excited reaction. Gloves went flying through the air, shrieks, yelling, and assorted hoots and howls abounded. My dad explained that earlier in the year, all the dads had planned this. Big Russ, and believe it or not, his dad, Huge Gene, Brad, and of course, Mr. Tidwell, me, my sister Kathy, Dad, Mike C., and Big John were all going. We were stoked. We were to leave at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning, drive right to Yankee Stadium, watch the game, and drive right back. Of course, we were taking the coveted Plymouth Fury 3 wagon. I searched my memory banks, but I couldn't remember going anywhere that wasn't under an hour or so drive. This was incredible, a true baseball miracle. I tried to question my dad as to why, but never really got a straight answer as to how he was able to swing it. My best answer from him was, "If you keep pressing it, we don't have to go." This quickly ended my line of questioning. While we all rooted for the Sox, my sister Kathy loved, and still does, the Sox. We were going to get a chance not only to see the house that Ruth built, Yankee Stadium, but all of the great players from both teams. Fred Lynn, Carlton Fisk, Yaz, Jim Rice, Rico Petrocelli, Thurman Munson, Greg Nettles, who we hated, Willie Randolph, and pitching that day was the great Catfish Hunter. When he took the mound, I swear you could see fear in the batter's eyes. Saturday morning finally came. My mom had made sandwiches, and we had a bag of chips and sodas for the drive down and back. Everything was packed in a big cooler that we threw in the back of the wagon. I was out in the car early trying to figure out who was going to go sit where when I saw huge Gene and Brad running down the street towards me. Mike C. was bolting out of his door and flying down the stairs. Big Russ was tripping over himself, cutting through his yard and darting down the street. The dads, of course, were not running, but they were making it down. My dad and Kathy came out the front door carrying a bunch of extra jackets my mom made them bring. We all assembled outside the car, looked at each other, and then back at the car. The Plymouth Fury 3 could hold about 100 people. My dad was driving, so his seat was all set. Mr. Tidwell rode shotgun. Big Russ's dad sat behind my dad, and Big John sat behind Mr. Tidwell. There was plenty of room in back couch, but none of us wanted to sit between Big John and Big Russ's dad. So we put the rumble seat down, and the entire back laid flat. This left a huge space for all 5 of us to sit or lie down in the back, even with several coolers back there. We piled in, and away we went. My dad tooted the horn as he backed out of the driveway and waved to my mom on the top of the stairs. Dad immediately slammed on the brakes, not 30 feet from our house. He opened the door and ran back to the house. Back he came running, waving the tickets in hand. "Don't want to get there without these," he said. Away we went again, at least for another 30 feet. Then slam! The brakes were hit again. Little Brad had to use the bathroom. Luckily, we were right in front of the Tidwell's house anyway. He climbed out of the back of the Fury 3. In the house he went, with all of us yelling at him because he was slowing us down. Back out he came, jumped up on the back bumper, and dove in through the back window of the Fury 3 wagon. Off we went again. This time, Mr. Tidwell, our shotgun host, made the following announcement. "Hey, that was it. Hold your pee or deal with me. We will stop for gas later, and that's it. Understand?" No one questioned him except my dad, who asked rather sarcastically, "It's okay if I have to stop, isn't it?" I think back to then and now in terms of cars and safety. If I piled my kids into the back of the SUV with no seatbelts and let them bang around for 5 hours, I'm pretty sure I would be arrested for endangering the welfare of a child. But then, heck, pile in and let's go. The wagon was pretty much a tank, but so was every other car on the road. You actually had a big steel beam on the front for a bumper that might get a dent if you're in the classic fender bender. With today's cars, the entire front end would crush in a fender bender and cost $3,000 to fix. But I digress. 6 kids in the back of the Fury 3 needed something to do. My dad only listened to AM radio. I don't think the Fury 3 even had FM. The only air conditioning we had was when somebody in the front seats opened up a window. Usually that only happened when one of them wanted to smoke a Marlboro. With 4 adults in the car, I don't think there was a time when one of them did not have a Marlboro going. When they all got going at once, we would lay down in the back holding our T-shirts over our mouths, trying to stop the smoke from coming into our lungs. We would cough really loud to get them to stop smoking. Occasionally, it worked. Big Russ wanted to flip baseball cards. Card flipping was one thing where you could stand up and flip the card on the ground. The first person who flipped his card on the ground would get his card. The first person who flipped his card on the ground would get his card so it landed either heads up, meaning the side with the baseball players facing up, or tails up, meaning the side with the stats were facing up. In either case, the person who went next had to get the opposite side up to win. The winner got to keep the flipped cards. This was a good game for 2 people, but we had 6 kids in a small area. I suggested we card toss instead. I explained my game to the guys and my sister. You had to flip your card at the cooler at the back of the car. Your card had to hit the cooler, bounce off of it, and fall, no matter which side was facing up. The winner was the one closest to the cooler without touching it, meaning you had to hit the cooler, but you only wanted to just bounce off of it and come within a fraction of an inch of the cooler. Each person flipped 1 card per round, and the closest one won all the other cards. Brad threw in another rule. He did not want people stashing away their good cards and playing with crap. He insisted that everyone put their cards out in front of them. Kathy always had and always traveled with the best stack of cards. She put out 200 cards stacked in rubber bands in groups of 50. Heck, me. I had 2 packs of unopened cards that I bought last night at the Gansevoort Market with some of my church money from Father H. I really wasn't too keen on playing for them. I knew I had 16 new cards in each pack, plus the gum. I hadn't opened them yet, because I was saving the gum. Huge Gene had a small box of 50 or so in it. Big Russ had a couple of rubber-banded packs, maybe 40 total. Mike C., like me, had 2 new packs he hadn't opened either. We bought these at the same time last night. So, because Mike C. and I only had 32 cards, everyone was required to count out 32 cards off the top, shuffle them, and lay the pile down, stats up, in front of them. This would be the stack they had to use for the game. We all began the shuffling and stacking process. Boom! All of us shot down and then sprang straight up in the air till our head hit the ceiling and down we came. Pothole, you're okay. Sorry about that, kids, yelled my dad. This hurt a bit, but more importantly, it threw our piles of cards into disarray. We had to try and get them back into stacks of 32. I got my cards all stacked and crawled back to push the cooler back up against the tailgate, giving us maximum room. So there we all were, sitting, squatting behind a line on the floor that was actually where the rumble seat folded into the floor. You had to throw from behind that line off the top mark of your deck. We played several rounds of rock, paper, scissors to see who went first and last. After a half hour of fights back and forth, just about who went first, I finally said, look, just start with Big Russ on the end and move right down the line to Kathy. God will be there before we even start this game. So we started. Big Russ flipped over his card to show us who we were playing for. It was none other than George Brett. I played third base and my glove was signed for him. I wanted him. We didn't get to a lot of Royals games on TV, but we sure read about him in the paper. He always had a highlight on This Week in Baseball with Mel Allen. Mel was the best. He had a very distinctive voice with his trademark, "How about that?" Big Russ's card hit the cooler and bounced back almost a foot from the cooler. "Ha, too hard. Bye-bye, Brett," the crowd chanted, eager to see Big Russ lose. Mike C. was next, his eyes bugged out as he flipped his card over to see who he was gambling away. He flipped Kurt Bavacqua, second base for the Brewers. Kurt Bavacqua was in just about every deck of cards we bought that summer. I think I finished the summer with 207 Kurt Bavacqua cards. "Ah, no big loss," he shouted out. He casually flipped the card towards a cooler. It was like slow motion. It fluttered in the air towards the cooler, just barely bumping into it, and settled down not more than a quarter inch from the cooler. Mike C. was in his glory. "Whoa, man, George Brett goes down to Kurt Bavacqua." Now the chance started for me. I had to beat a quarter of an inch. I flipped over my card and was now trying to hold on to Boog Powell of the Indians, the Booger as we called him. I figured there's no way to beat Mike C's and only half-heartedly flung my Booger down at the cooler. It banged against the cooler and jackknifed right into Mike C's Kurt Bavacqua, sliding Kurt down an inch or so away from the cooler, and the booger settled on top of Kurt, laying just a half inch from the cooler. This caused major controversy. Mike C. was complaining to Brad about pass interference from my card. Brad yelled back that there was no such thing as pass interference in tossing cards. Mr. Tidwell, all the way from front, came down with a decree. Keep it down back there. What's going on? We did our best to explain the situation, all yelling at the same time. There's no interference. The cards land where they land, he bellowed. Huge Gene was next. He flipped over his card and was now gambling with Sweet Lou Piniella of the Yankees. Come on, Sweet Lou, he yelled. I knew his strategy. He was going to try and bounce Sweet Lou hard off the collar and knock me out, just as I had done to Mike C. Mike C. flung it at the cooler. It flipped over in the air, bounced off my booger, and skidded way back from the cooler. I was still the closest. Little Brad was next. He slowly turned over his card, making us all wait in anticipation about who we might possibly get from him. He turned over none other than Cesar Cedeno from Houston. I swear 75% of all Rawlings baseball gloves in the 70s had Cesar Cedeno's signature on it, but never got to see him play on TV. But everyone said he was the greatest. We didn't even know what he looked like. Little Brad tried something a little different. He flipped his card almost straight up into the air. It bounced off the latch that holds the cooler shut, flipped over in the air, hit the ground, teetered back, and swooshed several inches away from the cooler. I was still the closest. Now it was my sister Kathy's turn. We waited in anticipation of her flip to see who she had given up. Kathy looked at us all, slowly reaching down to flip her card over. She flipped it over, and it was none other than her all-time favorite, Carl Yastrzemski of the Sox. She loved Yaz and did not want at all to part with him. But she knew the rules. She reared back, flung her card in the air. Boom, bang! We all went sailing down and then straight up. Our heads hit the ceiling again. Pothole! We all yelled. The cards went sailing around the car. We settled back down, everyone scampering to see where all the cards were. No one touches the cards, yelled Huge Gene. Let's see where they are. We looked around. The cooler had slid down to the side. We found all the cards except Yaz. He was nowhere to be seen until Kathy spotted him. He was under the blanket, just a hair away from the cooler. I won, I won, I won. Yaz is closer. Yaz is closer, she yelled. Wait a second, I said. This isn't fair. How can this be determined by a pothole? The calamity ensued. Two sides developed. The screaming escalated. Challenges were issued. Do-overs were called for. Until from up front, what the heck is going on back there? Keep it down. I'm driving, yelled my dad. Big John, Mike C's dad, popped his head in the back area with us. What's all the yelling about? We screamed out to him our version of the incident. You know what? Everybody take your own cards back and knock it off, he exclaimed, and turned his head around. The verdict from Judge Big John had been handed down. The ride continued on and on and on. We played 20 questions, 20 times. We played I Spy with My Little Eye about 5 times. We had rubber band war with all the baseball card rubber bands. We ate and drank all of the sandwiches, sodas, and chips. It pretty much looked like a war zone in the back area. It was even starting to smell now that everyone had drank 400 Cokes and we were all gassed up. It got to be a little bit of a contest back there as to who could fart the loudest, the smelliest, the longest. My sister was not liking this game so much. The questions had been asked and answered 100 times, but we had to ask over and over anyways, are we there yet? How much longer? One of us would yell up occasionally. The usual retort, snappier each time we asked, would come back, not yet, almost, shut up, I'm driving. Back in a minute. Thank you. Big Russ had started up with Mike C. about something. I could see Mike C's eyes bugging out of his head, and even to the point where tears were starting to form in them, but not quite all out crying. was a little pushing and shoving back and forth, and then Big John reached back with one hand into the tailgate area and plucked Mike C. up and then down right in the seat next to Big John. Big Russ's father turned around and yelled at Russ to get up in the seat too. Now it was just 4 of us back there. It seemed like now we could stretch out. Big Russ was not at all thrilled about being pulled up to front to sit. He kept looking back with his beady, evil eyes. Heck, none of us caused your problems, we all thought. From the back, we could see that we were now off the main highway. My dad yelled back to look up as best we can. The New York City skyline could be seen. We contorted our heads all kinds of different ways as we tried to look out the back, and finally we could make out some buildings. What I was noticing, though, was that we went from highway to a city. We were in bumper-to-bumper traffic. We were so close to the big trucks in back and on the sides of us, we were able to do the thing where you act like you're pulling down on a cord, and that pretend cord pulls the air horn in the big trucks. If you're lucky, the big truckers will actually pull the real air horns for you. We got a few of them to do it. It was pretty cool. Big Russ was even madder now because he could not be in the back, and now he could not get the truckers to pull the air horns. Poor Russ, we thought. Yeah, right. We were all laughing at his troubles, and he knew it. That was making him even madder. Then Big Russ stands on the back couch and yells out, "If I can't have fun, nobody can have any fun." Mr. Tidwell, looking back at him, laughed and started to say something to Big Russ when Big Russ reached up in the front seat, took the bill of my dad's Red Sox ball cap, and pulled it down over his head and held it there. Please keep in mind that my dad was driving and now could not see where he was going. Dad slammed on the brakes and fought a little with Big Russ to get his hands off the hat. The Fury 3 swerving over the lanes as my dad had his foot on the brakes and hands off the wheel, getting Russ away. Mr. Tidwell got a hold of Russ's hands while my dad pulled up the bill of the hat, only to look straight ahead with what I'm sure was an "oh shit" look on his face at the back end of a big truck. My dad gunned the Fury 3 around to move away, pulling off the side of the road, hitting the curb hard as we did. We came to a screeching halt. I was scared shitless. The car became completely silent. Big Russ was in the back seat, cowering next to his dad. Mike C's bug eyes were fixed on Big Russ. Mr. Tidwell finally let go of Big Russ's hands. Mr. Tidwell's big paw marks were showing on Big Russ's arm. Looked like large white Mickey Mouse hands surrounded by red on Russ's arms. But at least he wasn't holding the hat down over my dad's eyes anymore. My dad got out the car, leaned into the back window, and whispered something to Big Russ's dad. To this day, I'm not sure what he said. My dad looked around the car for damage, and there it was. The front driver's side tire had blown when it hit the curb. In those days, it was a regular occurrence for us to get a flat. I'm not sure if it was the cheap tires my dad bought or how they made tires back then, but in either case, I can't seem to remember the last flat I ever had. Anyway, we knew the drill for a flat tire. Each of us, all of the coolers, everything else we needed to get out of the tailgate area. We quickly unloaded everything on the side. In the middle of what I am guessing today is the Bronx. It must have been quite a sight for all the Bronx natives. First of all, a bunch of dorky Sox fans pulling their gypsy wagon up onto the sidewalk and unloading. Then we kind of set up camp there while my dad changed the tire. We sat on the coolers and had some more sodas. We could just about see the top of Yankee Stadium over the other buildings, so we knew we were close. Big Russ and his dad were walking around, with Russ blabbering into his dad's chest. It was disgusting. Now that I look back on it, I don't ever remember hearing Big Russ say, "I'm sorry," to my dad. He just blabbered like he was the victim. Somehow, something had made him reach up and pull my dad's hat over his eyes. We sat around on the coolers flipping cards again, trying to pass the time. We were all geared up to the game. We started to notice a few people walking by with Yankees hats and shirts on. Then after a bit, more and more started walking by. Once in a while, someone would yell at us that the Sox sucked. Mr. Tidwell informed us that we were in enemy territory. Yankee fans hated Sox fans, and we were right in the heart of their homeland. Right around the corner from the beloved house that Ruth built, Yankee Stadium. And that's the first half of the chapter about their trip to Yankee Stadium from the book Tales from My Bicentennial Year by Mike Buell. Back in a minute. So thank you. I wanted to comment that I'm reading this book and remind people I'm reading this book because it's a little slice of Americana. I grew up during the 70s. That's my coming of age in the 70s. And so I remember a lot of the things that he's talking about. But the whole idea of family, the importance of family, the importance of parents, and the fact that parents were more involved in their kids' lives. There wasn't a helicoptering, as you can hear in these stories, going on. They didn't, they let their kids go. Mike would say, hey, I'm going out and playing football. And his mom would say, fine, be back by dinner time or be back before it's dark. We used to get that a lot when we were kids. If we were going to go out to play with other kids, we'd be told be back before it's dark or before dinner time. And if we came back late, of course, we caught a lot of flack for it. We get yelled at and whatnot. So, as a matter of fact, I remember my mom had a big brass bell. And so she wanted to call us in for dinner. She would go out on the porch with this big brass bell and start ringing it. And all the other kids in the neighborhood knew what that was. She was the only one that did that. And so they'd start laughing and teasing us and say, you better go in for dinner time. So, but anyways, again, people asking, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? Be a parent. Be a parent. And the legacy of your parenting and parenting skills is going to last for 20, 40, 60 years or more. Thank you. Who is the socialist? He is the man that is spiritual. He's the man that seeks consensus. He's subjective, petty, and small, taking everything in life personally. He's outrageous, boring, and rude. He pretends to be a leader and a change agent. He pretends that he's your friend. He is sly, cunning, and deceptive. He dresses, acts, and speaks like a slob. He is informal and terminally unique. He is childish and pretends that he knows nothing. He has no conscience and pretends that might makes right and that the ends justify the means. He is impulsive and rationalizes his behavior. He is deterministic, blaming others for his mistakes. He is skeptical, demanding that others solve his problems. His unreasonableness and irresponsibility make him a bad role model, bad father, brother, family member, friend, and a bad person, period. So if you think that you can be friends with a socialist, think again. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers, and reminding you to listen to the John and Ken Show on KFI AM 640, Monday through Friday from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Pacific Time. Also, KFI needs to bring back Brian Suits and his show, The Dark Secret Place. Hashtag bring back Brian Suits. Until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.